seventh session on today is dancing music in the history of psychology, and we will have two very interesting speech. The first one by Janka Kormos, and it's about dance of human interaction, the history of the movement in the humanities. Please, Janka.
Can you hear me? Is this on, or do I have to use that one?
Hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Janka Kormos, and I'm just going to open. Which one is presentation? What do I click on in the Italian? I just want to put it to full screen. Do you see?
You want to show only this one?
Just the whole presentation.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. This is the. So I'm Janka Kormos. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Pécs in Hungary at the Theoretical Psychoanalysis PhD program. And I'm going to present today about the history of the movement in the 20th century, or the history of movement behavior research in the humanities. This is sort of a peripheral topic from my PhD thesis, which is actually focusing on a psychoanalyst and Judith S. Kestenberg and her movement analysis system. But while I was researching Kestenberg's work, I stumbled upon a lot of other researchers who also dealt with movement behavior and developed comprehensive systems to understand movement behavior. So I don't know whether you were here last year, but in the last year's conference, I presented about how dance became scientific and therapeutic in the first half of the 20th century in the US, and it engendered the discipline of dance movement therapy. Now today's presentation is a little bit of the other side of this topic, where researchers in the humanities come in contact with movement theories developed by dancers, and they get inspired by this and start to research bodily movement. So today's presentation is about this story where there's a special reciprocity between the scientific and the artistic, which engenders this interdisciplinary interest in the study of movement behavior in the 20th century in the USA. So these movement researchers began to view human interaction consisting of complex choreographic structures and specific rhythmic compositions. They had an interest in operationalizing aspects of expressive movement. They also viewed nonverbal interaction as choreographies and adapted systems of movement analysis developed by dancers. The main sources of this research project were the early publications from most influential movement behavior researchers in these movements, conference proceedings about the development of this discipline, and the publications of the Institute of Nonverbal Communication Research. I did this research with the support of the Hungarian Fulbright Foundation at the Clarice Smith's Library of Performing Arts at University of Maryland. So today in this presentation I will focus on trying to introduce the main researchers within this movement, which had two waves. Here are the most influential figures whose work I'm going to talk about, but I'm more focusing on the development of this movement, so I'm not going to be able to go into all the details of their specific methods. But the methods that they developed include context analysis, the natural history method, interaction chronograph, personality test based on movement, and the movement psychodiagnostic inventory. And I'm also going to talk about the establishment of the Institute for Nonverbal Communication Research and the journal that they sponsored, the Kinesis Report. So Lucia Ruprecht, a dance historian, also pointed out that in the early 20th century, the study of gesture took center stage in art, cultural theory, and even in science. The emergence of numerous gestural theories, dance notation technology, systems of movement analysis, as well as the psychotherapeutic application of dance and movement display this tendency towards movement in modernity. This is not only evident in the emergence of lifestyle reform movements at the turn of the century and the physical culture movements, but also in the growth of interest in movement expression in the humanities. So around in the 1920s, Rudolf von Laban was an Austro-Hungarian pioneer of European dance, started to work on his movement theories. He attempted to make them scientific, and so he anchored his movement theories and principles of movement expression in psychophysical concepts. Whitney Lamley's study demonstrated very in detail, which is a historical analysis of Laban's movement theories and the widespread influence it had on various fields. So it was applied in movement-based aptitude testing, psychoanalytic personality test of which is called the Kestenberg movement profile. Also was used in Alan Lomax's dance ethnology study, and Martha Davis adapted it to create or develop her psychodiagnostic inventory. Now these are the Laban-based systems, which I'm not going to talk too much about because these are more known than the other systems that I want to talk about today. So movement behavior research is a transdisciplinary field which focuses on movement expression and nonverbal interaction. So some researchers looked at nonverbal communication from the perspective of structural linguistics. Some social scientists looked at socio-cultural processes, how cultural meaning is associated with particular forms of movement and gestures. In the field of sciences, they were interested in the interaction between mental states and movement, bodily movement, cognitive and mental processes. They investigated cognitive and mental processes. Psychotherapists also explored therapeutic alliance and psychic containment and therapeutic change through looking at the movement behavior of the client and the therapist, how they synchronize each other, how they mirror each other's movements, and so on. So the first wave of this movement, we could date this to the 1930s and 40s, and it started with Golden Allport's, David Efron's and Elliot D. Chappell's work. So Allport in 1933 published this book entitled Studies in Expressive Movement, where he investigated individual differences in the organization of personalities through surveying qualities of expressive movement and writing style. He conducted various experiments with about 30 subjects, so not very large research. At the Harvard Psychology School, and he was really investigating whether movement behavior can be assessed, personality can be assessed through movement behavior. So he focused on the individual differences in performance of certain adaptive activities. David Effron studied gestural behavior across generations of Jewish and Italian immigrants in the USA. He published his work entitled Gesture and Environment in 1941. He used data collection, he collected his data through direct observation of people talking in the public squares. He also used a painter to visualize this data, so the painter made this drawing actually also about the different types of gestures, and then he created a classification of gestures. He was mainly interested in how the kinesthetic structure of gesture, what are the kinesthetic structures of gestures and how they change during a process of cultural assimilation. And Chappell was an anthropologist who created this kind of event recorder, which he called the interaction chronograph. He was looking at people in conversation, and this interaction chronograph recorded the times that each of the interactants spent active, and he was trying to look at certain rhythmic patterns between in the turn-taking behavior of the interactants. So I was really interested in rhythm and the time that the interactants spent active, and how they gave over this, how they took turns in interaction. Yeah, so this was like a technology capturing a personal activity profile, and Chapa was really looking at synchronization and asynchronization patterns. And he stated that in his research he's found that interacting partners prefer rhythmic synchronization, and he also conceptualized that interaction and rhythms revealed subtle interplay between cultural convention and individual temperamental patterns. So in the second wave, which started in the late 60s, which we could also view as a sort of revolt against the expressionism of the 30s, researchers started to, largely influenced by information theory, systems theory, and cybernetics, shifted their focus and started to look at kinetic elements of meaning transfer and more onto the rhythmic organization of movement flow, how interacting partners attune to each other, and how do they echo each other's movements, and how they mirror each other. In the second wave, one of the influential researchers, we could say, was Ray Birdwhistell, who established actually this discipline called kinesics. He viewed movement behavior as from the perspective of structural linguistics, and he created the kinematic equivalent of terms of phoneme and morpheme to kinema and morpheme, kinemorpheme. And he had also established the Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Communication Laboratory at the Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute. He pioneered with Albert Schefflen this method of context analysis, or naturalistic or natural history method. They call it a naturalistic method of movement behavior research, where they are not using experimentals. They are not doing experimental researches, but they are videotaping people interacting, and they are using uncut footage, because they want to capture the whole context and the whole flow of movement behavior. And a large amount of their work was actually identifying what is a movement unit, so what can we call similar to a word in language, which is a word, has an end, a beginning and an end, and how do you find this unit of something in a continuous flow of movement. Birdwhistell's colleague, Schefflen, was a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who worked on this microanalytic approach to movement and context analytic approach to movement with Birdwhistell. His work was more emphasizing that movement behavior follows certain principles of certain. It could be equivalent to communicational programs, that stabilize and regulate the relationship between partners through specific movement sequences. So he really understood this kind of programmatic systems theory view of movement behavior. Judith S. Kestenberg was a psychoanalyst who developed the psychodynamic theory of movement development based on Laban's movement notation system. She was also concerned with rhythm, so she integrated the Freudian drive theory and the psychosexual phase theory with Rudolf Laban's movement theories, and created the concept of developmental rhythms. This is Kestenberg notating someone's movements in terms of the rhythms. These curves are different qualities of that she can see in somebody's movement. Norbert Friedman was also a psychoanalyst who actually then went very much towards the experimental side in movement behavior research. So Friedman and Bucci investigated the relationship between gesture types and cognitive styles, as well as psychiatric conditions. They were particularly on bodily movement during associative monologue, so they wanted to see how the gestures are embedded in the associative process of somebody saying a monologue and associating ideas, and how they use these gestures in order to link image to word, and so how gesturing is not separate from the cognitive process of associating ideas into a monologue. So here I just wanted to sort of bring together all the different systems and what they wanted to do. So about what are they interested in terms of movement, and how do they differ. So there were some of the customer movement profile in the first column, and all the other ones listed there. They are interested in individual movement repertoire. So what is the individual idiosyncratic specialty of someone's movement, and how does that relate to their personality? There are the anthropologists, Chappell, Afron, Schefflen, and Birdwissel, who were interested in culture and social processes. And there are other systems, for example, the movement psychodynamic inventory and Friedman's work, which is more geared towards really collecting empirical data and using their methods of movement analysis for experimental studies. And also another table where I just wanted to show how differently they thought of movement behavior. So what organizes movement behavior? All of these thinkers and researchers think quite differently. What is the thing that organizes movement behavior, and what is the function of bodily movement? They also have quite varying opinions and focuses. And so I just want to talk a little bit more about how they organize themselves as a group, and whether this is a discipline that we can consider as being a discipline that where they are together, or are they completely isolated from each other. So the Martha Davis, who was very committed to build scientific recognition for movement behavior research, founded the Institute for Nonverbal Communication Research. This institute published the Kinesis report. So they had a number of scientific conferences, I think altogether 4. So these conferences brought together these researchers that I was talking about. So in the Kinesis report, it was published between 1972 to 1982. After that, there were, because of lack of funds, they stopped publishing this journal. Martha Davis was the editor-in-chief, but the editorial board consisted of dancers, anthropologists, psychiatrists, psychologists such as Irmgard Bartenjev, Byers, Norbert Friedman, Adam Kendall, Judith Kestenberg, and Israel Zwerling. So in the Kinesis report, they published reports on the development of the discipline, also published funding opportunities, calls for papers for researchers, and on any project that was inclusive of movement study or movement research. In addition to the Kinesis report, there were 3 other journals who were very open to publishing studies of these movement researchers. One was the Semiotica, a journal of nonverbal behavior, and the American Journal for Dance Therapy. Now, the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior actually did not accept microanalytic studies, only experimental studies. And this is going to be a bit of this is going to pose a bit of a difficulty for this field to create a real legitimization for itself, because there were many more microanalysts in this group than experimental researchers. And so here is a quote from the Reader's Forum of the Kinesis report by Marsha Firestone in 1980, where she says that there's a considerable lack of knowledge about nonverbal behavior in many disciplines. Not only am I surprised sometimes by the reaction of professionals in related disciplines, I'm appalled by the reaction of some administrations to an interest in nonverbal communication. I understand that a multi-campus university turned down the appointment of an internationally recognized researcher in our field on the basis that nonverbal communication research is insubstantial. I myself was turned down for an appointment at a school in New York City because of my own associations with the field. And then I don't want to read the whole thing, but at the end also she says some parts of the public may infer from the name nonverbal communication that we are into the occult. So, so they were struggling to really also to bring together these researchers as really a discipline and to create or make it as an academic discipline. I just want to say two more things about when these researchers came together and met. So the first meeting, which was not an official congress, this was just a meeting of the very early researchers in 1959 at the Palo Alto Center for Advanced Studies, Advanced Behavioral Studies. And the first official congress was held at Columbia University in 1979. It was entitled Interaction Rhythms. So in the 1959 meeting, different groups, I think 4 research groups, were analyzing the same video material of a family psychotherapy session. And then they exchanged their ideas and methodologies. But this was really the very beginning when they were just experimenting. When they were just doing pure research to even find their own methodology of how to deal with movement behavior. So they were really exchanging ideas of what methodologies were they using. And in 1979, so the first Congress, the movement behavior research expanded somewhat, so they had 17 different research groups presenting studies there. And here the main theme was, as the main theme of the second wave, the phenomenon of shared periodicity and interaction rhythm. This was the main theme that people were presenting works, studies about. And so what I want to sort of bring this whole presentation to is that at both events, the researchers often describe these interactional behaviors as choreographies. And so Birdwhistle in the 1959 meeting said this about a coffee table interaction of this family psychotherapy session where there is the family and then the psychotherapist. They are sitting by a coffee table. It's called the coffee table scene. So a dance is no more special than how and when she adjusted her shoes. The interaction is similarly multidimensional in time and structure. Even based on our limited experience with sound film, we found that interactive movement sequences are strikingly similar to dance because of their strictly defined choreographic forms. And Schäfflen began the 1979 conference with the following way. First, the discovery of interaction rhythms have implications for our personal views of human experience and our own participation in human relationships. We can begin to discuss this by looking at the history of Western thought. It is surprising how late we have discovered the obvious. Any dancer or musician would have told us that we needed a common rhythm to sing, play, and dance together. Why didn't we realize earlier that interaction rhythms are essential to all human interaction? Are scientists always the last to know what artists and others have known for a long time? So my closing thoughts would be going back to Lucia Ruprecht, a dance historian who pointed out or argued that gesturalism in Western dance in the early 20th century, introduced through the fascination with hands, also introduced a new conception of the subject, the image of the modern hand-controlling subject. And this hand-controlling subject, or the hand-manipulating subject and centralized to modernity, is also demonstrated in the increase of gesturalism within dance, but also in the growth of scientific research on movement expression, which I just tried to present. Okay. That was everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question?
Maybe this is beyond the borders of your project, but I wonder if you are interested in the ways that dancers memorialize movements themselves, you know, the ways they translate movement into writing or into other kinds of records, and what relation there is between that and the very formal work that's going on in things like law notation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's yes, I am very much involved in that too. I mean, as I said, this is a little bit of a peripheral, smaller research project from my PhD, but Judith S. Kestenberg's work, which is the main focus of my PhD thesis, she's using Laban notation, and so I did through her work research Laban notation and the history of Laban notation, and some other there are other like the Benesch movement notation system. So yeah, this is very fascinating, and actually more in relation to this group. Daniel Stern was part of also this group, and in the 1967 he also became part of a project called the Performance Group Project, where he was working with performers, dance performers and actors, where they used kinesic analysis that Stern developed, so how he was notating or classifying different movements to influence rehearsals, and how they would for example embody a certain character. So there's a lot of going back and forth between this the dancers who create their own methodologies to preserve dances and choreographies, and then that's taken by some of these scientists to then understand.
We have room for one more question.
Yeah, thank you. When you were talking about the video experiments, I was thinking about the sorts of experiments that also videoed mother-child interaction, looking at kind of developmental psychology, attachment, and things. And I just wondered, did these groups have links, or were they kind of a totally separate field of in what is in many ways also very much non-verbal kind of interaction?
Yeah, this is it was a bit of a difficult task to demarcate and like say, okay, these are the researchers that I'm going to talk about, but because they have more central figure, I mean, in this movement there are more central figures and more peripheral ones. There isn't a direct link actually between the infant mental health researchers who did. I mean, Kestenberg also did observational studies on children and video studies, and I think the only person who I would associate with this developmental psychology and infant mental health is Beatrice Baby, who was part of this group, and she did do a video recording of babies and presented with them, but I think she presented at one of the conferences, and actually when I looked through this archive, there was not really, she was not a central, but so there are some links, but not direct, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.